Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm your host, Brian Keane. I am here with a second time guest.
That's right.
Mark Fennell is a life coach, best-selling author, speaker, and TV personality. He is the host of Carpool Conversation and the owner of Tribe. His platforms are full of great content where he shares advice that works based on 20 years of experience. He's also the co-owner of Weight Wellness with his wife and qualified PT, Fiona, where they help with your mindset and weight loss. This is the second appearance, as I mentioned, episode 477, Life Coach Mark Fennell on why we can't stop overthinking, how fear is the real thing holding us back, and finally becoming emotionally unstuck will be linked in the description if you haven't checked out the first episode. I'm looking forward to talking all things weight loss, mindset, and life advice in general in today's show. Mark, welcome back to the podcast.
And thanks for having me.
Mate, so many things we can go into, but this episode is going out the 13th of January, 3 days before you launch a program, which we'll get onto as we go through. And this is the time of the year where people struggle with weight loss. They struggle with their mindset around weight loss in particular and emotional eating and everything in between. Talk to us a little bit about the mindset when it comes to weight loss, because it's very easy at this time of year to get obsessed with calories in, calories out, or even just eating healthy food, nourishing, and neglect the mindset side. Talk to us a little bit about that.
And I think people say, it's 10% exercise, 90% the food and so forth, or 20%, or however you could it, I say it like this, it's 100% the mindset. Whether you're looking at your food or the exercise or the gym or whatever else, it all comes down to your thinking. It all starts there. Our brain is running a mile a minute faster than we can even keep up with. You've got parts of the brain, the height. I mean, put it like this. You've got your prefrontal cortex. You've got your amygdala, your kind of limbic system, which is kind of in a fight or flight mode and whatever else. You have all these things intricately talking to each other all the time. And what I mean by that is they're telling stories, showing images, and they're giving reactions. And what's amazing is that we don't realize how important the mindset is, but ultimately your mindset is set at any given second or minute of the day. And with that in mind, then it's fundamental when it comes to obviously our body image, but also when it comes to our weight and so forth. And I think there's so much out there now where there's a lot of fads out there. There's a lot of pills and potions and so forth. But I've been coaching people for just over 20 years now. And the reason I say that is I've seen how the weight loss industry, which I'm not in. I always say I'm in the mindset industry, but the weight loss industry has kind of changed over the years, right? And a lot of good has changed, but other stuff is kind of maybe not so good. But what I will say and what I have seen is that the mindset was the thing, and probably still is the thing that is neglected, but yet it's the fundamental aspect of who we are, our quality of life, and where we end up in life. It all comes back to our thinking. And I say it's impossible to say to someone, if someone wants to lose weight, by looking at the plate and arguing with the fridge and restricting yourself over here and trying to go to a gym that maybe you don't enjoy and do all of those things, and those things are needed. I love the gym, but all those things without actually getting to the fundamental, which is your mindset. And people say, well, what is mindset exactly? It's how you think, and it's the stories you tell yourself. That's just putting it in its simplest form. But there's a whole, should we say, infrastructure in your mind, and some of it we're aware of and some of it we're not aware of, but it's constantly running. It's always assessing, always analyzing, and it's always, should we say, guiding us in a direction we want to go. So one of the things I say when people sign up to weight wellness, and I say, well, we will look at the plate, we will look at movement, but we will primarily look at your mindset, because that's where everything is won or lost before you even get to the fridge at the end of the day.
Mark, talk to us about the stories people tell themselves when it comes to weight loss, some of the common ones you see in terms of unsupportive narratives.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stories or a lot of the beliefs that we have, and sometimes they're limiting beliefs if we call it that, but basically we get into a rut and we think we've tried and we failed, maybe had some success, maybe failed if it comes to trying to lose some weight or whatever. And before we realize it and before we know it, we're in that cycle of, a perpetual failing. Now I believe I'm a failure. What's the point in even trying? And what we end up doing then is we get to a place of, well, what's the point in even trying? Sure, I might as well just, this is who I am. I'm big boned anyway. I'm not made like those people who are the gym junkies. That's not me. And then we take on this identity and say, this is who I am. And it becomes and governs our life's choices, especially when it comes to things like, food and so forth. So the stories can come from our past. And I think our parents get a lot of blame. These days it's kind of, it's because of the parents, I think there's too much of that going on, okay? And maybe you had bad parents, maybe you had an awful upbringing. We've all got a story to tell. We've all got a past. And a lot of it we would like to change or edit or even just delete, I'm sure, right? If you ask everybody. There's a book in everyone, I believe. But if we are always circling that airport, you know what? We'll never go anywhere. the airport of, well, I'm like this because of that. So a lot of our stories are based, as you and I know, in our past, right? And we justify our current limiting beliefs, or shall I say, we justify our position in life and not going after our true potential because we justify it based off the stories of old. And we all have those stories. And there is a time to process those stories. I know we were talking about this before we came on. There's a time to talk, but don't set up shop there. Circle that airport a few times, but then ultimately you got to define a destination. And, I was speaking at an event recently, and I remember saying that and say, a lot of people say, the big question, who am I, is the big question. And I say, well, before we answer that, where do you want to go in life? Or instead of asking, who am I, ask, well, who do you want to be? And sometimes that dichotomy makes people think a little bit different. Who do I want to be? Oh, I said, if the canvas was blank and we rewound to the day you were born and we said, right, you can be whoever you put on this sheet now, and we're going to make sure that your whole past is written accordingly to make it happen. Oh, and that I find shifts the mindset a little bit. And I do that when people want to lose weight. I go, well, why do you want to lose the weight? I'll ask them, what's prompted this weight gain? And they might say a story of old, or maybe they're busy, or maybe they're stressed, which we can talk about separately. But there's many reasons that we become who we otherwise would love to not be. And say, well, who would you like to be? Where would you like to go if the canvas was blank today and you had a brand new start, genie in a bottle, click your fingers tomorrow, and you were that person? And I go, and even at that, there's a resistance. Well, I don't know. Well, I'm not sure. And I said, well, how would you like to feel most days? I know everyone says, I'd like to be happy every day. Don't ever make happiness as your goal, because you'll be chasing it forever and it will come and go just as quick, right? It's not realistic. But contentment is a fair game to play for. So I said, you'd like to be content. Okay. What would you like to be doing that might generate that contentment? Well, I'd like to be, and eventually, long and the short of it, they'll come to, I'd like to be able to make the right choices on the food. I'd like to be able to enjoy my food, but not feel that it's feeling guilty afterwards. They'll define who they want to be. And I say, well, if that's who you want to be, what's stopping you being that person today? So when you say, who am I? Well, actually, this is the person I am. What's stopping you? And so a lot of the time, that's where the stories will come in, and that's where we'll try and debunk that. And so what I always say is like this: we can talk about the past till the cows come home. And there is a time to process it, but you've got to move. You've got to not justify being where you're at. And I will always work with people, and Weight Wellness does it very much so, is it's getting them to believe that they can have a life on their terms. As opposed to, should we say, most people think, oh, life happens to me, or, well, you can be a person who says life happens for me. It's like the person when I say, well, if you walking every day will serve you a little bit better. Oh, I don't want to walk. I don't want to walk. But if you switch in your head, say, I get to walk, because a lot of people don't. You now kind of go, oh, you have a new gratitude or appreciation for something that maybe you otherwise wouldn't enjoy. Now you'll enjoy it that little bit more, realizing I get to walk. And so when it comes down to it, it's knowing where we want to go in life. We're so often just preoccupied with where we're at. And when we're asked who are we reflect it and base it on our past. But what if the past wasn't there? Now you really draw on the real you. The real, you now get creative. The person's body language will even shift when they start going, who do I want to be if the past was just deleted? I know we can't actually do that, but just let's, hypothetically pretend we could. And you'll see their body change and they'll smile again. And there's an element of confusion at first, but it turns into excitement. Oh my goodness, well, if I was rewriting my life, I'd be this person. And all of this comes out. So what I'm saying is we know who we want to be. It's all in there. We just sometimes have to unlock it and realize that we deserve to be that person. We have the potential to be that person, because so many of us are convinced we don't deserve that because of maybe what we've done or maybe what we've been through. Well, you can be a victor or a victim in life, but you choose at the end of the day. And I think that's where the mindset, the stories, the limiting beliefs and all that stuff come down to. And that's where the shift can be made. And once a person realizes, you know what? I actually know who I want to be. And who I want to be is I want to be able to shop in that shop, because I can't. I don't want to have to shop in that, like certain shops because of their size. And it costs so much more money to shop in those specific shops. I don't want to be shopping in those shops. I want to shop in those shops. And it's not about the aesthetic. As I always say it, don't lose weight just because of how it looks, because you'll never do it, or it won't last. But when you do it for you in here and you realize, and this is why people say, funny enough, I'm doing this weight loss program. But at the end of the day, what I've been doing for years is helping people see who they can be. And that there's, should we say it like this? They have the power to be. And it's when that is there, everything changes. I'll give it to you like this. If I said to you, do you know what? There's €1,000 there's a house on fire and there's €1,000 sitting on the kitchen table. And if you can get it, it's yours. You got €1,000 burn a building. No, it's not worth risking that. Now, if I said to someone else, there's €1,000,000 in the kitchen there. There's a check for €1,000,000. You can get it if you go in. They'll weigh it up a lot more. The motivation goes up because the reward is higher. But now I said, the person you love the most in the world is in that kitchen. You don't even see the flames. You know what I mean? You're in there. You're going. The point is, that's the level of motivation one needs to work towards and unlock. And when you unlock that, and saying no to something on a plate becomes a whole lot easier because now all of a sudden you're in the zone. You go, I don't have to cut out anything. I just have to watch the portions and away we go. When you get that level of value. But what if I say it like this? Your potential, contentment, fulfillment, and happiness is in that house. Are you prepared to fight those flames? And when you get the person to switch that on, and that's what when I work with people, that's what I do. Now there's no stopping them. Now the January motivation is not even relevant. It's like, no, this is who I am. This is the way it's going to be. Life is now on my terms. I'm not basing my present off my past anymore. It's who I am today, new chapter, and away we go.
Talk to us about that identity there then, because I'm going to come back around guilt around food, because this is something a lot of people struggle with. But perpetual failure and that narrative, I'm a failure, I feel like a failure, I can't stick to anything, I keep falling off diets. They're narratives that circle in people's heads and they 100%. become belief systems. You repeat something long enough,
you believe it.
You start to believe it. Would somebody break out of that? Because identity is huge. What you said there, your entire identity shifts to somebody that makes these different choices based on an underlying why, an underlying motivation, a thing that they've unlocked. For someone that is struggling to shift that identity, what do they need to look at first in order to make that positive change?
The first thing I do, like I mentioned, is, well, if the canvas was blank, who would you like to be? So it's getting them to open up the mindset a little bit to there's alternatives. You know, I'm not saying we're there. I'm not saying you're feeling it. I'm not saying that you're going to buy into it tomorrow. But just if you could, so creatively get them out of that, shift their mindset into that prefrontal cortex, out of the stress part of the brain where they create and actually can kind of get excited almost. So I start with that. Where do you want to go? It's like anything else. Like when someone comes to me and I'm coaching a client or a company and I'll say to them, well, where do you want to go? I say, well, why are you here? You know, they go, well, and then we'll start with dealing with that. And a lot of the time, we talk about the problem. And that's understandable. But I say, instead of asking why I'm like this or why that happened to me, and this is just true for life, your better question is, what now? What next? It's a much better question than asking why, because you may never find the answer, but you'll always find an answer to what next. And I think that's the question. So I say to people, when it comes to who's stuck with, I've tried lots of things, I've failed lots of times. And I'll always say, well, have you ever actually focused on trying to shift your mindset? And a lot of people say, well, not really. I've focused on calorie controlled and I've focused on
next diet,
gym.
Yeah,
you know, and that stuff. I said, well, you've not dealt with the fundamental computer that drives all this, is your mindset. So with that in mind, I'll always say, what do you want? And they'll say, well, I want to get down to whatever weight. And I'll ask, why do you want it? And they'll say, well, you know what? I don't like how I feel. And the identity piece, and here's where it shows up. We see ourselves a certain way inside. We all do this. We see ourselves at an approximate age and approximate size, looking at an approximate way. And I can testify to this myself. I remember seeing a picture of me on it was a photograph taken of me on a stage from the side. And I went, is that my belly? No, that's not me, is it? I had put on a bit of weight. And I said, I don't believe it. That's not how I see myself. I see myself as 22, but I don't see myself looking like, oh, that's not how I identify with. So now we have this, should we say, disconnect with who I am in the real world and how I see myself. And what happens with that is, and I always say this is the fundamental identity, how you see yourself, that's the person you need to lean into, because that's more often than not driven by your true self, your true desires, what you really want. Right? So how you see yourself in here, when you can get that reflected on the outside, that's when you'll find that word called contentment, because now there's an alignment. When there's a disconnect, and this is why we've got the midlife crisis with people, because they kind of realize one day, you know what, I'm 50. Hang on a minute. I don't look like I feel or used to think I was when I was 25. Okay, I'll try and reverse the clock by buying the jacket, the motorbike, the Porsche, or whatever it takes to reverse the clock aesthetically, even though I may not be able to do it physically. And that's why we have it, because they don't identify with what they see and how the life has become, because they had a completely different notion within themselves. They're just forced to reflect. A lot of people had this midlife crisis over COVID. You know what I mean? At many ages, people realizing, no, is this who I want to be? Is this how I want things to be? So I ask, if you're not happy, if externally doesn't line up with internally, why is that? Number one. And secondly, what can we do about it? Is there options? Do you want to stay like this or do you want to do something about it? No. And if they say, okay, well then let's go to the how. Let's work out how we're going to change that. I mean, this change, it starts with your thinking. You got to look at your food. You got to look at movement, but it all goes back to your thinking. So when you get the external lined up with the internal for the right reasons, the right motives, now I'll run into the burning building for my potential motivation. And that motivation is long-term change. That's the difference. Motivation in January comes and goes because it's an emotion at the end of the day. Or I'm getting ready for a wedding, I lose the weight. As soon as the wedding's gone, they're on the binge, because that's kind of time stamped. But what's the long game? Well, do you want to be the person you see yourself as being externally and internally aligning? That's true identity. And some people say that's self-actualization. You can call it true self, call it what you will, but that's it at the end of the day. Why are so many men angry? A lot of men are angry, right? I don't know. I'm not going to say generally everyone's angry, but a lot of men are angry and frustrated. I see this. And I think the frustration for a lot, and this I'm going to kind of, just from what I see online and so forth, but there's a lot of anger because things are not how they wanted them to be and they don't know how to change it. And I think that's what makes a lot of men angry. And someone says, if I'm angry or if I'm sad or I'm upset, whatever, I say, emotions are like, I wrote about this in my first book, emotions are like our radar pinging. They're not bad. They're telling you something. Listen, what's the ping on the radar? There's something that needs attention. And us men tend to bottle it up and put it under the carpet. It's a lot easier to do that than actually talk about it. And years can pass. But it's telling you something. So if someone's angry or frustrated with their weight, because I had one gentleman who did the program with me, we're fortunate where we get quite a good few men sign up, which is brilliant. But one man did it. He said, I was angry with myself and with life. And I just still wanted to have the food, still wanted to have the few drinks, a few points, but I was angry because I just wasn't looking like I wanted to look, feeling like I wanted to feel. I was tired. I couldn't keep up with the kids running around. I just was angry and frustrated and all these things. And he said, I had a difficult childhood and all this anger. And I said, what's anger? Frustration at the end of the day. It's a disconnect to something you're not happy with. And he says, everything. I'm just not happy with anything. And I said, blank page. What would make you happy with everything? And the first thing he wrote down was getting my weight controlled. And it was purely for him, not aesthetics, just for him. He said, I was always fit in school. And I hate the fact that I'm this older guy now. He's in his 40s. And I said, so we made a list. We went at it. And he lost 33 pounds in 10 weeks, which was just super. Because we'd never recommend lose more than 2 pounds a week. But he stuck to the thing and that's his body just started shifting quicker, which happens
as well.
Yeah. And he says, I feel like, his words, and I remember I wrote it in the Google review, he said, I feel like myself again. He says, nothing's going to take it from me, and certainly not the plate. So that's the difference. The weight for a lot of people is there for many different reasons. And, I think a lot of it comes from, we're growing up. Oh, Johnny cut his knee. Here's a lollipop. Oh, Mary's upset. Here's ice cream. Oh, you did great in school. Let's go to McDonald's. We've seen that the food is a treat, a cure, or a comfort. And we're conditioned that way. And that story is there. It's running away. And so whenever we need a cure or a comfort or a treat, now when we're in our adult life, we do what we've always been shown to do. And sometimes we need to shift that and change that and realize you can have it as a treat, a cure, or a comfort. But the problem is maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's an alternative. And maybe it's not serving you. For him, it was the few points every weekend and so forth and the takeaway on the way home and all that kind of stuff. But he says, I feel like myself again. I think when we can feel like ourselves again and feel like, for a woman might say, to feel beautiful again, it's not for anyone else. It has to be for you. Now it's true change. And now you have a chance of making it long-term change. And that's the key.
What about the people who struggle with the blank canvas? Because I'm drawing that beautiful bridge that if you can see what the idealized version of you looks like, the perfect you or the vision of yourself that you'd like to be on this blank canvas, you can reverse engineer the path for how to potentially get there. For those, because I've worked with people in the past, and I'm sure it's the exact same with you and Fiona, that people who are like, I don't know what the ideal version of me looks like. What advice would you offer to those people? Because I'm going to tie into the guilt around food.
I love this question.
Yeah, I'm very curious to hear, because there's a lot who are listening who go, that's me.
Yeah.
What do you say to them?
So that's a lot of people, right? Is it 50-50 maybe? I don't know. But a lot of people know what they need to change. But there's a lot of people who don't. A lot of people just, I don't want to be like this, but I don't know what would fix it. And I don't know if I can, or even believe I can, or even if I deserve it, or I'm not enough. There's lots of narratives. So what I always say, well, let's do the Irish thing, right? And I say the Irish thing, 'cause this is how we all pick holidays. We go on TripAdvisor and we don't look at the positives, we look at the negatives, right? So the first thing we look at, what's the 1 stars? So first thing we do, right? So I always say, well, let's not worry about what you want. What do you not want? And start there. Well, I don't want to be tired every 3 o'clock every afternoon. I want to be out to, I don't want to be out of breath when I run up the stairs. I don't want to be feeling guilty every time I go out to a restaurant because I've overeaten and had the 5 courses or whatever. So I always start, well, what do you not want? Because ultimately, the opposite of it is what you want. I want to have energy at 3 o'clock. I want to be able to not feel guilty and have that dessert. So start with what you don't want is an easier way to figure out what you do want. And I'll probably say that's probably the majority of people. And when you start to list down what you don't want, we're very good at that. We all know what we don't want. We're not sure what the blank canvas maybe is, but start with what you don't want and you'll find that's going to automatically fill in the blank canvas. And now you've got it to build on. And sometimes, as I say, sometimes I'm brought into a company when things aren't always going in a good direction. So I'm brought in, prevention's great, but most people bring it in sometimes when, look at, the team's angry, we're frustrated, bottom lines, quarters aren't working, whatever else. We need to get the team motivated again and whatever else. You're trying to motivate them in a difficult time. But the same is true for us people. I say, well, what do we not want? Well, we want to raise this. We want to change that. And as soon as you start to shift that mindset, there's a tool that I quite often use, and it's called GPS. It's called Goal, Problem, Solution. Okay? You've probably heard about the elevator pitch term. You should be able to pitch your business or pitch a thing and idea in 30 seconds, yada, yada. Well, we need to be able to do that with ourselves. We tend to focus on the problem and talk about the problem all day long. But if we change that in our mindset, in our approach to a problem. So say the problem is, I don't want to feel a 3 o'clock slump, right? I'm just tired every day at 3 o'clock or whatever else. We know it's not hormonal, but that's the way it is, right? So that's the problem, right? What's the goal then? To not be tired at 3 o'clock, right? So, okay, to not be tired at 3 o'clock. And what would be a possible solution? Okay, here's a couple of solutions. Now reword that to me. And the person goes, look, my goal is to not be at a slump at 3 o'clock. The problem is I am tired at 3 o'clock and here's possible solutions. And that may sound so subtle, but it shifts the mindset into a constructive, creative, imaginative state, okay? And the neuroscience around this is fascinating. But when we start with a positive, even though we're here to talk about a problem, but we start with a positive, it shifts the openness towards receiving the solution. So if you're ever pitching a problem to your boss, don't run in with the problem. Go, look, I know this is the goal, but here's the problem and here's some potential solutions. It keeps in that prefrontal cortex, out of the limbic system, out of the fight or flight, just by framing it very simply with, well, here's the goal, here's the problem, here's the solution. They sound very similar, but when you start to reframe it, you'll write your emails different. You'll talk to yourself different. Oh, why am I so tired? Well, look, the goal is not to be tired. Okay, the problem is I am. What's my possible solutions? It keeps you in a different part of your brain. It literally lights up a different part of your brain. So simple little things like that can actually be ultimately GPS. Great little tool. Do you know who, I don't say created it. They didn't call it this. Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba.com. He's worth 26 billion. So he must be doing something right. But he didn't speak English too well in the initial days in 1995 before Alibaba. And he used to say to people, don't come to me with a problem. Come with the goal, then the problem and possible solutions, even if they're wild. And he found that the table with his colleagues ran a little bit smoother when they framed it in such a way. So be careful how you're framing the story. As I always say, look, nothing's a problem. It's just a logistic to be figured out.
I love that. I'm going stealing that for my personal life, definitely. Talking about logistics that need to be figured out. Talk to us about guilt around food. This is a big thing for people. Massive. And it comes in different shapes and forms. I call it pre-guilt, post-guilt, because some people have pre-guilt around, well, I can't go out. I had one of my clients that I was working with in a 12-week program who, before she came to me, was like, one of my issues was I didn't want to go for my birthday and have cake, because if I have one cake, I'm going to eat the whole cake. Yeah. And then my friends are going to think I'm a pig. My family is going to think I'm a pig.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And all these stories that came with it. And so that's pre-guilt. It's putting yourself out and not allowing yourself in situations where you're going to go, quote unquote, off food plan. Yeah. Post-guilt is different. It's I've eaten stuff that I wasn't supposed to, quote unquote, again, not supposed to in terms of relative, whatever their goal is in terms of weight loss in this case. And they feel terrible about themselves and they fall into a guilt or a shame spiral. They're slightly different, but talk to us about someone who's trying to figure out that.
Yes, right. Well, here's the problem, right? Weight loss already sounds negative because it's loss. I know we're losing weight, but we also feel like, well, I'm losing out on this. I'm losing out on that taste. I'm losing out on that flavor, and life will never be the same. My treats are gone. This is depressing, right? So what tends to happen with a lot of weight loss programs, they're focused on the loss. And in fairness, because there is things you're going to have to change. But I say it on our program, don't give up anything. And I love me chip on it. No, don't give it up. But we are going to look at the portions. You know what I mean? We are going to look at the intake. And when you start to look at the portion, you go, well, is it actually worth the calories? You know, because I'm still starving after the thing, you know. But my point is, we tend to look, and then there's this, yes, the guilt you mentioned. I feel guilty if I do, and then I feel deprived if I don't. Sure, that's two negative mindsets. How can you ever win? Do I want to feel deprived or guilty? Which is it? You know, that's kind of your only options. That's not the best.
Yeah,
do
you want to be hunger shot? Like,
do you know what I mean? It's like there's no easier path there. So to deal with that, and what I even see when it comes to guilt, I see parent guilt and I see mum guilt. And here's what I mean. You know, I'm a mum and I've got the kids and I'm busy. I feel guilty putting this time into, you know, watching a workshop or doing a walk for me, just me, because I can't bring them because they don't walk the speed I walk, obviously. And I feel guilty, you know, and I say, so guilt in any shape or form is going to scupper you from the get-go if allowed, right? So how do we deal with that guilt? Well, it's like this. It's all about value. So the ego doesn't want to be deprived and the ego doesn't want to feel guilty. It wants to have its cake and eat it and feel great, right? It's reversing the dopamine reward system. And this is key. Now, this is key. And what I mean by that is you're talking to someone who at one point, I was so busy in life, I loved the chipper and that was convenient, you know, away I went. And this is how I did it. I remember one time, and it was around the time I saw that picture of me on the stage, and I went, oh my goodness, I can't believe I've put on so much weight. Oh, sure, listen, how much weight do I have to lose? And I remember doing the numbers, oh my goodness, I hadn't weighed myself in years. And I know it's not all about the scales, but I was using that as a reference point. And I realized I'm way overweight. Oh, so much to lose, why even start? And then, you know, giving up this and giving up that, do I want to? And this is how I reverse engineered the dopamine thing. I was out for Mother's Day with mother and so forth, and we went for, you know, fancy dinner as you do, stuffed, coming home, and I smelt chipper. Right? And I went, I'd love a few chips. Now, I'd just been out. I'm not hungry. Clearly not hungry. This is a long time ago. Let me just stress that for just for the record.
Right before we came in for the podcast.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. And I remember going, I'd love a chipper. And I got it just for the taste. I think they're the words that scupper a lot of people, just for the taste. And you end up overdoing it. Got the chips, went home, couldn't even finish them, was too full, was feeling way too full. And I realized that's brutal. And it was around the same time, like I said, I saw my weight and I said, this needs to change. This is not the way I want to be or who I am, you know? And so I started that identity thing. Is this how you want to be? Because continue as you are, this is how it's going to be. And here's how I dealt with the dopamine rewiring system. When I would get a smell of a chipper, I got to a place and I'd say, there's a smell of a chipper and I'm not going into the chipper. And I used to purposely walk by the chipper with the dog to smell the chipper. And I used to say, we had a boxer at the time. And I used to purposely walk by the chipper to get the smell and go, and I'm not walking in. I'm saying no. What happens is this. You get an element of dopamine because you are now achieving something of self, and it's something of self-worth as well. It's something of self-control. If you do that long enough and consistently enough, the ego begins to buy in. Yeah, that is us. The ego's like a teenager. Yeah, we're cool. We can't say no. And you reverse engineer. Now you're getting a dopamine reward from not eating the food. Now, that can only be born through action and consistency over time and constantly reminding yourself. But it can be done. That's why the program I do is 10 weeks, because you're not going to do that in the first 3 weeks. But you reverse engineer the dopamine system. Now, when you say no to something, or if I get a bag of chips and I half it with my wife, it's like, yeah, cool. It becomes your new norm. Because remember, you've got the serotonin, the oxytocin, the dopamine. You have all of these things working against you. That dopamine hit, when you reach for that Malteser, you know, dopamine rises up, and then dynorphin makes sure that it comes back to center again. So you're like, oh, I need another hit. You take it again, and you've got the seesaw happening. And that's why we eat a whole bag of Maltesers. But you wouldn't eat a whole box of blueberries. You know what I mean? The same thing.
Yeah, I like blueberries.
Yeah, oh no, I do too.
on occasion, I've eaten a full box of blueberries.
Yeah.
For full disclosure.
Depends on the box. But no, but the point is, for many, it wouldn't have the same appeal. And so they might go, well, how could I compare the thing? But when you swap out and go, you know, I can have 11 blueberries for one Malteser, right? And if, to someone, that's no trade. But the person who's mastered it now is becoming their true self. They're proud eating those blueberries. They've got this new level of identity. And they're saying, you know what? And that's now a new level of dopamine. They're not even tempted anymore. You know, my wife used to love chocolate and a cup of tea. She's a personal trainer, but that was her crutch until she wanted, she did the program when we first did it. And she now will have chocolate very rarely. She doesn't even have it every week. Very rarely. But the amazing thing is now, she goes, I get more dopamine from that chocolate now when I have it, because I'm not having it all the time. And I get more dopamine by having a cup of tea and having a healthier alternative. That actually lights her up now. So that's where you can get to. That's an identity shift, but that's a mindset shift at the end of the day. So when it comes to the guilt, you've got to it sounds easier said than done, but to deal with that guilt of the cake, the deprivation, you know, what is it? Deprived or guilty? The way you do it is, well, you got to look at the reward on the other side. You're not there yet. And here's how I say it. If there was a 10-foot wall and you were on one side and the person you'd love to be was on the other, and I said to you, you know what? What's that person doing? What's their lifestyle? Well, they're saying no to that dessert. They're going out, and this is what I'd say to you. They're going out to a restaurant, enjoying themselves and not feeling guilty or deprived. And they say, that person is there. Well, that person's actually already on the same side of the wall as you. You just need to make that the decisions accordingly. And that person will become you in time. At first, it's going to be hard, yes. But in time, the guilt will dissolve, the deprivedness will go away, the ego start to buy in, the dopamine will be there, the serotonin and so forth. And I always say, you'll be the average of the 5 closest people to you. Get around people who are on the same path and at the same place of the journey as you, and it gets a whole lot easier, because oxytocin is proven to grow most when it's amongst a group. If it's like this, if you have a laugh on your own, it's one thing, but a laugh with someone else, it's proven to bond people. So my point is, when you get around people who are like in the gym and you're training together on a circuit or whatever else, that bonds people. That gives a sense of that, should we say, pick me up. You come out feeling good, but you've now had the community sense to it. And we're built that way as people. Start to do all of that. Now feeling guilty because you don't have dessert is gone. That's like, God, I used to be like that, but it's not me anymore. Now I can walk past the chipper any day of the week. I don't even think about it. I'm like, it's not me. You know, it's complete mindset shift, which is ultimately an identity shift. But at the very beginning, it comes down to your decisions.
I love that, Mark. And food freedom is the language I use. The client that I was working with who couldn't have a slice of cake, one of her goals, now she did tremendous with her weight loss as well, but one of her goals was her nephew's birthday towards the back end of the 12 weeks. And she sent me a message the 11th week on the Saturday had a slice of cake. My nephew's turning 10. He's my godchild. Like, I wanted to be able to have a cake. She's like, this is amazing. She goes, I didn't want more than the slice. I had the slice, enjoyed it. That food freedom feels like a goal that's astronomical in size when you're feeling that pre or post guilt around food, but it's achievable with that blank canvas. You want to be someone who has food freedom, who can have the slice of cake, who can have the drink, who can have half a bag of chips and give the other to their husband or wife. Yeah. That's ultimately what you're trying to do. So that's an identity shift. When it comes to...
That's the fire. You know that when you run into the building, well, the guilt and the feeling deprived, that's the flames. But you get through that, look at what's in there. And you sometimes have to kind of act in spite of how you feel and act in spite of how you think right now. You have your destination. You can't see the destination. You're going to be storms. But once you know where the destination, eventually you get close enough to realize, you know what, this heat doesn't bother me anymore.
When it comes to weight loss in particular then, one of the mistakes I see most often is people not shifting the identity on the front end. That's something that we do as coaches, where you're shifting the identity on the front end. It's like, where do you want to go? Asking someone their goal is basically a coaching point of trying to figure out who they want to become. That's all we're trying to do.
It's a flag in the sand.
It's a flag in the sand. That's effectively what it is. So when people are not shifting that identity, changing that identity, and they don't know they're working towards this goal, it makes it very hard. That, combining it with not knowing why they're doing it, and you can have your surface levels of why, and I want to lose weight as a surface level why, that's fine, but it generally doesn't sustain. It's a hot burning coal, but doesn't burn long. Yeah. So you need something underneath it. You want to be able to feel more energy, feel more confident, feel sexy in yourself. Maybe you're doing it for your kids so you can move. There's a whole host of different reasons that people need, but that why needs normally to be deeper than, I want to lose weight.
Absolutely.
With the mistakes people make, what's the most common one you see? Because with mindset, it's not like food where it's like, okay, calories are too high, nutrients are too low, sugar's too high, cravings are bad. They're a lot more straightforward when it comes to the nutrition approach. Mindset goes everything from guilt and shame to self-sabotage to identity, with all these other things circling around it. What's the most common mistake you see with people who are trying to lose weight?
The lack of belief that they can. I think that's the because they've tried and failed in the story of I've tried and failed before. Oh, I've been at this place where I've lost a bit. It's Christmas is coming. It's only going to go back on. It's this. So it's the self-belief piece first and foremost, and you can shift self-belief, but it has to be consistent. That's why with the program per se, there's the videos from me to kind of shift that. But the self-belief is the first thing. The second thing is the defeatist mindset at one. I likened it like this. You have a hurdle runner who's running the hurdle race. They're in the athlete. There's so many lanes. You're all running. They knock over a hurdle. You don't see them kind of, oh, that's it, I'm out. Walk off the race. They knock a hurdle, but they're still a hurdle runner and they're going to run because the point of the race is the finish. The point of the race is where you're getting to. And I say this to people because defeatist sets in because, oh, I didn't have a perfect day. Oh, that's it. What's the point? Oh, I've seen this before. Good luck. And then before you know it, they quit. It's the defeatist mindset sets in. So what I always say to people is, you're going to have days where you will probably make a mistake. Prove me wrong though, right? You're probably going to have days, prove me wrong. You may have days that are not perfect. Prove me wrong though. And they say, well, I'm not going to have any imperfect days. They're going to be great days, whatever else. So I always will challenge, but that's the truth of it because I say, but either way, hear me out. You're probably going to have days that may not be perfect and that's okay. An imperfect day is not an imperfect weekend unless you allow it. And the weekend doesn't become the week unless you allow it. So we got to bookend that day and say, hey, scratch that. Like, the line on the wall, scratch the day off. It's gone. Today's a new day. Each day's a new chapter kind of thing when you're on the program. So that's why I mean is, so believing that they can is the biggest hurdle. And the second one that knocks people off programs that have started is the defeatist mentality because they got it wrong or made a mistake or they reached for one too many and they know they did and now the guilt kind of scuppers them. And I'm saying, look, you're human. These things will happen. It's like even when people who are doing things perfectly and then their weight goes up because of water retention or hormones or time of the month and so on. So you're going to have to embrace those moments. It's not linear, a straight line. It's always going to be, peaks and troughs. It ebbs and flows. And that's the key to the weight loss, but it's knowing this ahead of time. They say when it comes to visualization, it's a term that gets used a lot. Not everyone knows what it is, but it's basically seeing yourself as the person you want to be. Okay. And what I quite often say to people is, I say, and this comes up, they go, I want to be able to shop in certain shops. And I say, can you see yourself shopping in that shop? And I say, yeah. How does that feel? What's it like? What does it feel like walking around the shop? Now that's just, external stuff, whatever. But to them, it's important because they haven't been able to shop in a certain shop because of sizes or whatever else. So I don't get hung up on that. But for one client, that was her thing. And I said, how would it feel walking around that shop, picking at the clothes and going into the change room and being able to pick, an outfit? That would be the lotto. That'd be the lotto. And I said, right, well, to get there, there's going to be challenges, peaks, troughs. You're not always going to be in the mood. Some days you're not, some days you are, blah, blah, blah. But I said, just remember that. And she would keep reminding herself of that's my goal to be like that. Because for her, when you talk about why, we broke down the whys. The thing in therapy that we do is called 5 whys. Why is it? Lose weight. Why do you want to lose weight? Because it makes me feel this way. Why does it make you feel that way? You go into 5 whys. And she said, because being able to shop in those shops means I'm free. So she was ultimately changing freedom. And I said, so you want to be free? This is what you need to do. I said, otherwise, do what you've always done and you'll be how you'll always be. And that's the decision that we sometimes have to be forced to make in life. But it's timing as well. It's getting the timing right. What I mean by that is some people aren't ready. If someone's come through grief, they're not in a headspace for that. So be nice to yourself. Allow yourself the bad days, but just don't quit. Remember, slow is still moving. Stopping is quitting.
I love that. And capacity is massive. What can you have? What do you have the capacity for right now?
Yeah.
Because as you said, if you're going through sometimes breakups, divorce, grieving, job loss, the things that can really rock you at your foundation, maybe you don't have the capacity to exercise multiple times a week. Maybe hitting a step count is actually going to be the way for you, or controlling your calories. Maybe you shouldn't be tracking them at all now. And again, not a love-hate. Some people love tracking. I've got clients who track. I have ones who don't do it at all. It's very much finding what's going to be a fit for you. It depends on your underlying food relationship, etc. But capacity is massive. Like, people are listening to this in January, possibly beyond, in February, March and beyond, that there's going to be times when you can really prioritize your health, your wellness, your weight loss, etc. There's going to be times when I'm similar to you, go slow, don't stop. There's a big difference there. Is slow in the directionally correct way is still moving forward and progressing, just at a slower speed. That's okay. Stopping means that you have to restart again.
Yeah, exactly.
And going from 0 to 1 can be more difficult. I want to ask a question. This indirectly ties, but one of the reels that I really liked that you did recently was be aware of fake friends.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there a slightly paraphrased version of you're the average of 5 people you spend the most time with. I regularly quote Jim Rohn from that line because I really believe it. Your friends play a big role in this. Your family member play a big role in this. Talk to us a little bit about fake friends, but maybe not fake friends in this context, maybe unsupportive friends, those who aren't on the journey with you and might not necessarily support an identity change because they like you, quote unquote, as you are.
Well, I'll give you a good story of a woman who did the program, and she had as she said, I come from a large family. But she said, all my older siblings, she was the youngest, all my older siblings are on blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication. And she said one of them had to get a toe amputated because of gout. One is pre-diabetic, one is diabetic. And she said the whole family was quite extreme. She said when we would go out to a restaurant, we would always say, oh, that portion's very small. Can I have some more? And they would always laugh at people who looked slim. They would always. So she said, I was brought up in that. But she said that she heard something similar to what you watched. She said, but what you said made a whole lot of sense. She said, because we're laughing at the person who, and I'm not saying slim, I don't even like using that word, right? But healthier weight, right? Where you're not getting health implications is a better way of saying it, to be fair. And she said, we're all laughing at people who aren't on medication, most likely because of what they're ingesting. And she said, so who's to say that they shouldn't be laughing at us? You know what I mean? Like, and she was that was her own words, because she said, we're the ones on the medication and killing ourselves. And she said, I just couldn't live with that anymore. And I didn't want to end out like my brothers and sisters were. So she said, I wanted to kind of change this. And you mentioned mindset and blah, blah, blah. Her family slagged her and like mocked her and gave her abuse and said, oh, was you going to eat like a rabbit? And all. She goes, no, I don't even like salad, you know, but there's other things I can eat. And they used to mock her and made it real difficult for her. And I remember it was really hard for her to shift her mindset because the influence of your family, your peers, but
Huge.
especially siblings,
Huge.
it's massive. Yeah. It's massive. You know, another girl who did the program, 2 sisters, and one of them got jealous of the other because she was now slimmer than her. And she was always as she said, I was always the bigger sister, now I was the slimmer sister. But going back to this girl, and she said, it was so hard. But she said, do I want to be like them? She was like, I didn't know who I wanted to be. I had no reference point. I had no role models. But she said, I knew I didn't want to end up like them. And I knew I would, because my doctor, and this is what triggered it for her. Her doctor says, he said, look, you're probably familiar with that medication. Your sister's on it, and you know, whatever, your family do it. So that's the one we'll be putting you on. And she said, familiar with medication because of our lifestyle and what we eat. And she said, I can't, that just alarm bells, something inside. And I always say that's the inner instinct going off you, the real you going, this isn't what we want here. Yeah. Long and the short of it, she did the program. It was actually the last Dublin Marathon, which was October 2024. She ran the marathon. Totally transformed. But here's the funny thing. She ran it with her sister. Her sister bought in when she started saying, you're looking amazing. Oh my God, you're able to do that, whatever else. When she started walking, they were saying, you're walking. What do you want for? In the rain. Oh, stop it. Sit here. And they'd offer her food. She said it was the most difficult thing ever. And her sister is now on the program, which is incredibly difficult, but it was very, very easy for her not to do anything because she had people around justifying the position. Mm-hmm. And it's like us, we can justify what who we are based off our past. And you'll even justify it more if you have other people around you, basing it off their past as well. Now you have a whole tribe, misery loves company. You have a whole tribe of people reiterating who you are and why you are, and therefore holding you back from ever progressing on. So it's massive. So this is why it's important to get around, and sometimes having just one other person who's rowing in with you can be a massive, massive help. The 2 sisters, one who got jealous of the other, she used to say, the older sister who wasn't on the program, oh, you probably think you're better than me now. That's how far it went. You think you're better than me now because you're looking well and whatever else. Oh, you're going on dates and whatever else and da da da. And she used to give her such abuse and she said, I was doing this for me, my health. That's above all. But she said, dealing when you have a sister like that, it would have been so easy for me to conform. And she was her elder sister, but she didn't. So you've got to quieten the noise. If people aren't going in the same direction as you, well, be careful of the, shall I say, input and influence you're allowing them have in your life, because they might be trying to bring it in a different direction.
I put up a post. I was 37 2 days ago, but this is going out in January. Thank you. I appreciate that. You're very kind, Mark. Checks in the post. I put up a post on 5 things that I wish I knew 10 years ago before I turned 27. And one of them was, it's okay to outgrow your friends. But the second one was that everyone's going to have an opinion on what you do. Everyone doesn't deserve equal weight with their opinion. And with something like your family members, your friends, if they're trying to pull you back, unfortunately, that is a way of life. Most of us have experienced it in some shape or form with friends, family members. I had it when I set up my business. I was called everything from stupid and an idiot to my face. I can only imagine what it was behind my back. Yeah. And then the same people coming around when books started to take off, business started to take off, going, well done, knew you'd do it. because opinions change when people get new evidence, and they actually forget. Like, what I always find really interesting about human psychology is that somebody will throw a comment your way, and it's just words that are aimed in your direction, and you can cling to them and hold on to them for decades. This is parental impact, mother, father, stuff that just holds there, and they'll have forgotten about it long ago. But yet you've held on to that narrative, and sometimes that can be helpful. Sometimes it can be something that helps you to unlearn and unpack, and you become a better version of you because of that. And other times it can be self-destructive and lead to self-sabotage and lead to belief issues and lead to an identity that's not serving, i.e. laughing at people who are, quote unquote, not at a risk of all-cause mortality because their weight is higher and they're on certain not on certain medications. That's huge. That's massive.
Yeah.
Knowing that there's people that are going to try and pull you back in. You sometimes need to be okay with that.
You see, you do. And I completely agree, because sometimes I say this many times, is you're like a mirror to people. And rather than deal with the reflection of themselves, they rather smash the mirror. They rather come after you. They rather pull you down rather than deal with the reflection. I'll just assassinate that person's character behind their back, to their face. I'll just slate them. Because if I look at that mirror for a moment and I reflect on myself, I'm reminded of my lack of achievement. I'm reminded of they're doing stuff that I could have done but didn't. They're doing stuff that I wish I was, but I'm not. And jealousy, envy, whatever it might be. So people will attack the mirror quicker than they'll actually reflect on themselves. And that's why people will try and pull you back, because it's easier to have you like them than them be like you when you're growing. And it's one thing to never forget and always remember. And I'll say it, people, I was coaching people and still do, and I have been for years. But how I got into the weight loss, the weight wellness is the name of the program. But how I got into because I was working with a woman, one particular story. And people have asked me, Mark, you work with mindset, you shift mindset. Would you not help people with weight loss? And I just, I said, okay, whatever. My wife being a personal trainer, she was on to me for years about doing one. But I had one story of one woman, if I can share it. And this might encourage people. But she had a couple of children. One was special needs and autistic. And she was out of the working world and she was looking after her child and so forth. And eventually been able to get a carer. And it was years later. And she said, do you know what? I don't know who I am. I've no job. I want to get back to working again. She completely just said, I've been looking after everyone else. And she said, I don't know who I am. And I just feel, she was getting kind of depressive about it. I just want to feel a sense of, I know my kids and my purpose, but something for me. So she wanted to get back into the working world. So I worked with her on her confidence, self-belief, and who she wanted to be and figuring all that stuff out. Never discussed nutrition or anything like that. After working with her for a period of time, she goes, I started actually walking a lot more and going on walks with my sister, and I've started eating a bit better and so forth. I never discussed any of that with her. And I was like, that's brilliant. But I'd seen this pattern over the time. When people start to get their self-worth, they automatically organically start to change things in their life they're not happy with. Naturally. Mm-hmm. No one's saying they have to. There's nothing big event coming up they're trying to do. And she said, you know what? I was thinking, I'm feeling like I love life again and I love me again and I'm getting back into the working world. I have a designer jacket that I haven't worn in years. She said, I love the jacket. And it was worth a fortune, so I could never throw it out. It doesn't fit me. She said, Mark, I was able to put that on at the weekend. And I realized I never discussed calories, walking, nothing. Just purely mindset and self-belief and who she was. And naturally, she looked at her weight and everything else. Didn't get a trainer or nothing, just naturally did it. We all know what we should and shouldn't eat. But it's the mindset that decides whether we do or don't. And it's the motivation, it's the undercurrent. Like we've got the hippocampus, the hypothalamus. All of these things are running off automation as much as they can. Like the reticular activation system in our mind, it naturally wants to automate the basal ganglia. It wants to automate as much because to save energy. So when it has a system that it's been doing for years, it becomes automated. To change them is not easy, neuroplasticity. But it is not easy, but it can be done with the right kind of fire. My point is, I ended up working with a group who went through bariatric surgery, which they kind of stapled the stomach, reduced the stomach, etc. I think you had a guest on actually recently.
Yes, Dr. Fiona, she was brilliant. Yeah.
So they asked me to come in because they said, it was a group, people who've gone through it, and had been through it. And they all had psychological evaluations to do it and whatever else. But they're saying they're still not content or they're still not feeling fulfilled and the cravings haven't gone away and they're feeling deprived and guilty all the time. So we realize it's not a physical thing. And it was a Facebook group, and I never go on Facebook, but they said, would you come and do a talk for us? And that's when I realized that it's all about mindset at the end of the day. That's where it all kind of hinges on for most things. So through the nooks and the crannies, through all those things over the years, that's what eventually brought us, and eventually my wife got her way to put the program together, because mindset is everything. And it's not easy to change, but it is changeable. It's not impossible.
I love that. And the beautiful way to wrap up, Mark, because coming into the new year, one of the things I try and promote on my channels, on the podcast is, yes, calories are important. Of course, you can't ignore the law of thermodynamics, but nourishing your body, moving more, all of these things are important. But if you don't have your mindset right, you're not going to be able to sustain any of that. You might do it for the first week of January. One of the calls to actions I give people is, if you're going to start something on the first week of January, second week of January, you should be able to do it on the first week of July or second week of July. Your food, your movement. And if you can get your mindset right, all the things that you've mentioned here, your identity, rewiring your relationship with failure, your surrounding yourself with the right people, all these things that are going to have a positive compound effect on your weight loss journey and your self-confidence, your self-esteem. Because ultimately with weight loss, and you've probably seen this over the years, Fiona definitely has, because she's been qualified PT for a long time, and same as myself, that people want the weight loss because of what they associate with it. They associate a rise in self-confidence. They associate a rise in self-esteem. They associate a rise in feeling good about the person they see in the mirror. That's great. And that's an amazing thing that we get to do as coaches. But ultimately, you can lose the weight and not feel better about yourself if you don't do it the right way.
And I've seen that.
Yes. And that's a travesty. It's a travesty. It's the I'll be happy win fallacy, where people get blinded by the outcome.
The chase.
They get there, not necessarily in the right way, but they get there and then they're like, I still feel shit about myself. I still don't feel any better. My self-esteem still is low. My self-confidence is still low. What's going on? And sometimes you need that, come to Jesus moment, for the lack of a better term, where people go, right, there's something wrong here. And I'm pointing to my head, the 6 inches between your two ears. And that's what's so important for people who want to follow up with the program that's starting on
January 16th.
January 16th. So 3 days after this goes out. And for those who are listening, I'll put the link in the description. They can follow the Instagram. I'll put both the Weight Wellness in the Instagram and your personal page, of course. Where can people find out more about the upcoming program?
Yeah, absolutely. I know. And I think the question is to ask yourself, if you're wondering, should I sign up, should I not, whatever, what's the real appetite for? Because when we emotionally eat, it's not about the food. It's about we're trying to change how we feel. And what's the real appetite for? What are you really wanting to feel like this year or whatever else? And don't just use the year as the benchmark, but what are you really wanting? Start with that. And if you're wanting and believing that you need to change things and around particularly weight, well then that's the time to make the plunge, whether it's our program or anyone's program, but don't do nothing. So if you want to find out more, you can go weightwellness.ie on Instagram, and it's the website, markfennell.ie for my own Instagram and the website, and you'll see Weight Wellness on there. It's a 10-week program.
Amazing. And for everyone listening, the link will be in the description below. Mark, keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.